called The Picture in the House. It's only about 6 pages long. Searchers after horror haunt strange, far places. For them are the catacombs of Ptolemy and the cavern mausolea of the nightmare countries. They climb to the moonlit towers of ruined Rhine castles and falter down black cobweb steps beneath the scattered stones of forgotten cities in Asia. The haunted wood and the desolate mountain are their shrines, and they linger around the sinister monoliths of uninhabited islands. But the true epicure in this terrible, to whom a new thrill of unutterable ghastliness is the chief end and justification of existence, esteems most of all the ancient, lonely farmhouses and backwoods of New England. For there, the dark elements of strength, solitude, grotesqueness, and ignorance combine to form the perfection of the hideous. Most horrible of all sights are the little unpainted wooden houses remote from traveled ways, usually squatted upon some damp, grassy, remote slope or leaning against some gigantic outcropping of rock. 200 years and more they have leaned or squatted there, while the vines have crawled and the trees have swelled and spread. They are almost hidden now in lawless luxuriances of green and guardian shrouds of shadow, but the small paned windows still share shockingly, as if blinking through a lethal stupor which wards off madness and dulling the memory of unutterable things. He likes talking about unutterable things, the unspoken things that are so scary you can't speak of them, that you can't describe them. This unimaginable horror is what he what he talks about a lot. We're seeing, much like the Poe stories I've been reading the last few weeks, a lot of commonalities, right, between the stories. So he's describing that these houses in New England that have sat for a couple hundred years, they are the perfection for people wanting to find these odd places of grotesqueness and hideousness. In such houses have dwelt generations of strange people, whose like the world has never seen. Seized with a gloomy and fanatical belief which exiled them from their kind, their ancestors sought the wilderness for freedom. There the scions of conquering race indeed flourished, free from the restrictions of their fellows, but cowered in an appalling slavery to the dismal phantasms of their own minds. Divorced from the enlightenment of civilization, the strength of these Puritans turned into singular channels, and in their isolation, morbid self-repression, and struggle for life with relentless nature. They came to them dark, furtive traits from their prehistoric depths of their cold northern heritage. By necessity, practical and by philosophy stern, these people were not beautiful in their sins. Erring as all mortals must, they were forced by their rigid code to seek concealment above all else, so that they came to use less and less taste in what they concealed. Only the silent, sleepy, staring houses in the backwoods can tell all that has lain hidden since the early days, and they are not communicative, being loath to shake off the drowsiness which helps them forget. Sometimes one feels that it would be merciful to tear down these houses, for they must often dream. It was to a time-battered edifice of this description that I was driven one afternoon in November 1896 by a rain of such chilling copiousness that any shelter was preferable to exposure. I had been traveling for some time among the people of the Miskatonic Valley in search of a certain genealogical data, and from the remote, devious and problematical nature of my course, had deemed it convenient to employ a bicycle despite the lateness of the season. Now I found myself upon an apparently abandoned road which I had chosen as a shortcut to Arkham. Overtaken by the storm at a point far from any town and confronted with no refuge save this antique and repellent wooden building, which blinked with bleared windows from between the two huge leafless elms near the foot of a rocky hill. Distant though as it is from the remnant of the road, this house nonetheless impressed me unfavorably the very moment I spied it. Honest, wholesome structures do not stare at travelers so slyly and so hauntingly. And in my genealogical researches, I had encountered legends of a century before which biased me against such places as this kind. Yet the force of the elements was such that overcome my scruples, and I did not hesitate to wheel my machine up to the weedy rise up to the closed door, which seemed at once so suggestive and secretive. So he knows from what he's read, what he's heard, that these places suck. These places are bad. These are bad places. But he's being soaked by chilling rain. So he ripped up to it on his bicycle and got inside. I had somehow taken it for granted that the house was abandoned. Yet as I approached it, I was not so sure. For though the walks were indeed overgrown with weeds, they seemed to retain their nature a little too well to argue such a complete desertion. Therefore, instead of trying the door, I knocked, feeling as I did so a trepidation so I could scarcely explain. As I waited on, as I waited on the rough, mossy rock which served as a doorstep, I glanced at the neighboring windows and the panes of the transom above me, and noticed that although old, rattling, and almost opaque with dirt, they were not broken. The building, then, must still be inhabited. Despite its isolation and general neglect, however, my rapping evoked no response. So after repeating the summons, I tried the rusty latch and found the door unfastened. Inside was a little vestibule with walls from which the plaster was falling, and through the doorway came a faint but peculiarly hateful odor. I entered, carrying my bicycle, and closed the door behind me. Ahead rose a narrow staircase, flanked by a small door, probably leading to the cellar, while to the left and right were closed doors leading to rooms on the ground floor. Leaning my bicycle against the wall, I opened the door on my left and then crossed into a small, low-ceilinged chamber, dimly lighted by its two dusty windows, and furnished in the barest and most primitive possible way. It appeared to be kind of a sitting room, for it had a table and several chairs, and an immense fireplace above which ticked an antique clock on a mantel. Books and papers were very few, and in the prevailing gloom I could not readily discern the titles. What interested me was the uniform air of archaism as displayed on every visible detail. Most of the houses in this region I had found rich in relics of the past, but here the antiquity was curiously complete, for in all the room I could not discover a single article of definitely post-revolutionary date. Had the furnishings been less humble, the place would have been a collector's paradise. As I surveyed this quaint apartment, I felt an increase in that aversion first excited by the bleak exterior of the house. Just what it was that I feared or loathed, I could by no means define, but something in the whole atmosphere seemed redolent of unhallowed age, of unpleasant crudeness, and of secrets which should be forgotten. I felt disinclined to sit down, and wandered about examining the various articles which I had noticed. The first object of my curiosity was a book of medium size lying on the table and presenting such an antediluvian aspect that I marveled at beholding it outside a museum or library. It was bound in leather with metal fittings, and was in an excellent state of preservation, being altogether an unusual sort of volume to encounter in an abode so lowly. When I opened it to the title page, my wonder grew even greater, for it proved to be nothing less rare than a Pigafetta's account of the Congo region, written in Latin from the notes of the sailor Lopex and printed at Frankfurt in 1598. I had often heard of this work, with its curious illustrations by the brothers de Bry, hence for a moment forgot my uneasiness in the desire to turn the pages before me. Their engravings were indeed interesting, drawn wholly from imagination and careless descriptions, and presented the people of the Congo with white skins and Caucasian features. Not would I as soon have closed the book had an exceedingly trivial circumstance upset my tired nerves and revived my sensation of disquiet. What annoyed me was merely the persistent way in which the volume tended to fall open onto plate number 12, which represented a gruesome detail of butcher's shop in the cannibal and Anzique. I experienced some shame at my susceptibility to so slight a thing, but the drawing nevertheless disturbed me, especially in connection with some adjacent passages descriptive of Anzique gastronomy. So he's the book itself. Every time he sets it down, wants to kind of open up to this plate that shows a cannibalistic scene. I had turned to a neighboring shelf and was examining its meager literary contents, an 18th century Bible, a Pilgrim's Progress, or of like period, illustrated with grotesque woodcuts and printed by the almanac maker Isaiah Thomas, and the rotting bulk of Cotton Mather's Magnalia Christi Americana, and a few other books of evidently equal age, when my attention was aroused by the unmistakable sound of walking in the room overhead. At first astonished and startled, considering the lack of response to my recent knocking at the door, I immediately afterward concluded that the walker had just awakened from a sound sleep, and listened with less surprise as the footsteps sounded on the creaking stairs. The tread was heavy, yet seemed to contain a curious quality of cautiousness, a quality which I disliked the more because of the tread being so heavy. When I had entered the room, I had shut the door behind me. Now a moment of silence during which the walker may have been inspecting my bicycle in the hall. I heard a fumbling at the latch and saw the paneled portal swing open again. In the doorway stood a person of such singular appearance that I should have exclaimed aloud, but for the restraints of good breeding. Gag me. Old, white-bearded, and ragged, my host possessed a countenance and physique which inspired equal wonder and respect. His height could not have been less than 6 feet, and despite a general air of age and poverty, he was stout and powerful in proportion. His face, almost hidden by the long beard which grew high on the cheeks, seemed abnormally ruddy and less wrinkled than one might expect, while over a high forehead fell a shock of white hair, little thinned by the years. His blue eyes, though a trifle bloodshot, seemed inexplicably keen and burning. But for his horrible unkeptness, the man would have been as distinguished looking as he was impressive. This unkeptness, however, made him offensive despite his face and figure. Of what his clothing consisted, I could hardly tell, for it seemed to me no more than a mass of tatters, surmounting a pair of high, heavy boots, and his lack of cleanliness surpassed description. So he's an imposing and imposing man that normally would have drawn the respect of the writer, except he's very unkempt. His clothes are just rags and tatters, and he's very, very dirty. The appearance of this man and the instinctive fear he inspired prepared me for something like enmity, so much that I almost shuddered through surprise and a sense of uncanny incongruity when he motioned me to a chair and addressed me in a thin, weak voice, full of fawning respect and ingratiating hospitality. His speech was very curious, an extreme form of Yankee dialect I had thought long extinct, and I studied it closely as he sat down opposite me for conversation. "Ketched in the rain, be ye?" he greeted. "Glad ye was nigh to Halcyon. Had sense to come right in. I calculate I was asleep, else I heard ye. I ain't as young as I used to be, and I need a powerful sight of naps nowadays. Travelin' fur? I hadn't seen many folks along this road since they took off for the Arkham stage." I replied that I was going to Arkham, and apologized for my rude entry to his domicile, whereupon he continued, "Glad to see ye, young sir. New faces is scarce round here, and I ain't got much to cheer me up these days. I guess you hail from Boston, do ye? I ain't never been there, but I can tell ye a town man when I see him. We had here for distruck stoolmaster in '84, but he quit sudden, and he no one had seen him ever since." Here the old man lapsed into kind of a chuckle, and made no exclamation when I questioned him. So he says, "We had a Bostoner here once." But he got a little bit spooked and took off, and started laughing. Wouldn't say any more. He seemed to be of aboundingly good humor, yet to possess these eccentricities of which might guess from his grooming. For some time he rambled on with an almost feverish genealogy, when it struck me to ask him how he came by so rare a book as Pigafetta's Regnum Congo. Remember, that was the first book that had the plate of the cannibalistic ritual in it. So he's asking him, "How did you get this book that's so rare that I've only heard of it? I've never seen it in the wild." The effect of this volume had not left me, and I felt a certain hesitancy of speaking of it, but curiosity overmastered all the vague fears which had steadily accumulated since my first glimpse of the house. To my relief, the question did not seem an awkward one, for the old man answered freely and volubly. "Oh, that African book, Captain Ebenezer Holt traded me for that in '68, as he was killed in the war." Something about the name of Ebenezer Holt caused me to look up sharply. I had encountered it in my genealogical work, but not in any record since the Revolution. I wondered if my host could help me in the task which I was laboring, and resolved to ask him about it later on. He continued, "Oh, Ebenezer was on a Salem merchantman for years, and picked up on a sight of queer stuff in every port. He got this up in London, I guess. He used to like to buy things in the shops. I was up to his house up on the hill trading horses when I see this book. I relished the pictures, so he gave it to me in a swap. 'Tis a queer book. Here, leave me get on my spectacles." The old man fumbled with his rags, producing a pair of dirty and amazingly antique glasses with small octagonal lenses and steel bows. Donning these, he reached for the volume on the table and turned the pages lovingly. "Oh, Ebenezer could read a little of this Latin, but I can't. I had 2 or 3 schoolmasters read me a bit, and Parson Clark, they had him say he got drowned in the pond. Can you make anything out of it?" I told him that I could, and translated for his benefit a paragraph near the beginning. If I erred, he was not scholar enough to correct me, for he seemed childishly pleased at my English version. His proximity was becoming rather obnoxious, yet I saw no way to escape without offending him. So the guy's moving closer and closer. Like, "Read me more, tell me more." And the writer is going, I was getting a little, I kind of wanted him to back off, but how do I do it without offending him? I was amused at the childish fondness of this ignorant old man for the pictures in a book he could not read, and wondered how much better he could read the few books in English which adorned the room. This revelation of simplicity removed much of the ill-defined apprehension I had felt, and I smiled as my host rambled on. Queer how the pictures can set a body thinking. Take this one here near the front. Have you ever seen trees like that with big leaves flopping over and down? And them men, them can't be Afrikaners. They do beat all. They they can't be Indians either, because I guess they must be Africans. Some of these here critters, they look like maybe monkeys, or I see maybe monkeys or half men. I ain't never heard nothing like this one. Here he pointed to a fabulous creature of the artist, which one might describe as sort of a dragon with the head of an alligator. But now I'll show ye the best one over here in the middle. The old man's speech grew a trifle thicker and his eyes assumed a brighter glow. But his fumbling hands, though seemingly clumsier than before, were entirely adequate to their mission. The book fell open almost of its own accord, and as if from frequent consultation of this place. Guess where it's opening up to? To the repellent 12th plate, showing a butcher's shop among the Anzique cannibals. My sense of restlessness returned, though I did not exhibit it. The especially bizarre thing was that the artist had made the Africans look like white men, like Caucasians. Their limbs and quarters hanging about the walls of the shop were ghastly, while the butcher with his axe was hideously incongruous. But my host seemed to relish the view as much as he disliked it. What ye think of this? Ain't never see one like hereabouts, eh? When I see this, I tell them, hold, that's something to stir you up and make your blood trickle. When I read the scripture about slaying, the Maldanates were slew, I kinder think things, but I ain't got no picture of it. Here a bloody can see all there is to it. I suppose 'tis sinful, but ain't we all born living in sin? That feller being chopped up gives me a tickle every time I look at him. I have to keep looking at him. See where the butcher cut off his feet? There's his head on the bench, with on one arm on the side of it and the other arm's on the other side of the meat block. As the man mumbled on in his shocking ecstasy, the expression on his look at this guy. Let's look at this guy first before we go on. Let's look at this guy. Oh my god. Look at this kitty cat. Here's Ashy. Little Ashy man. So the old man is like, he's not apprehensive of this picture at all, of the cannibal ritual. He loves it. He's taken by it. Oh, Ash, you're all dusty. What did you get into? So he's tickled by it. He thinks it's funny almost to see the butcher block and how the the African people in it are drawn like Caucasians. He's just in love with this picture, and it's weird. It's weird, right? That's weird. As the man mumbled on in his shocking ecstasy, the expression on his hairy spectacles face became indescribable, but his voice sank rather than mounted. My own sensations can scarcely be recorded. Let's do this, and then we can see the cat a little more. Is it going to work? Is it going to show up? See this? You see this? That's nice. Okay. My own sensations can scarcely be recorded. All the terror I had dimly felt before me rushed upon me actively and vividly, and I knew that I loathed the ancient and abhorrent creature so near me with infinite intensity. His madness, or at least, Ash. His madness, or at least his partial perversion, seemed beyond dispute. He was almost whispering now with a huskiness more terrible than a scream, and I trembled as I listened. As I says, 'tis queer how pictures set you thinking. D'ye know, young sir, I'm right sot on this one here. After I got the book in Neb, I asked to look at it a lot, especially when I heard Parson Clock rant on Sundays in his big wig. Once I tried something funny. Here, young fear, don't get scared. All I done was look at your picture before I killed the sheep for market. Killing sheep was kinda more fun after looking at it. So he says, I got some ideas after looking at this one here, but don't worry, don't get scared. It's just I like to look at this before I butcher sheep. Just it just sets my mind to something. Which is not the thing you want to hear when you've got an unknown dude right next to you and you're in his house, you're out in the middle of the woods. The tone of the old man now sank very low, sometimes becoming so faint that his words were hardly audible. I listened to the rain, to the rattling of the bleared small pane windows, and marked a rumbling of approaching thunder quite unusual for the season. Once a terrible flash and peal shook the frail house to its foundations, but the whisperer seemed not to notice. Killing sheep was kinda more fun, but it ain't quite satisfying. Queer how Raven gets a hold on ya. As we love the Almighty, young men, but don't tell nobody. But I swear to God, that picture began to make me hungry for victuals I cannot raise here, boy. Here, yet still, what's ailing ye? I didn't do nothing. I only wondered how 'twould be good if I did. They say meat makes blood and flesh and gives ye new life. And I wondered if 'twouldn't make a man live longer and longer if it was more of the same. But the whisperer never continued. The interruption was not produced by my fright, nor the rapidly increasing storm amidst whose fury I was presently to open my eyes in a smoky solitude of blackened ruins. It was produced by a very simple yet unusual happening. The open book lay flat between us, with the picture staring repulsively upward. As the old man said the words, "More of the same," a tiny splattering impact was heard, and something showed on the yellowed paper of the upturned volume. I thought of the rain and of the leaky roof, but rain is not red. On the butcher's shop of the Anzique cannibals, a small red splattering glistened picturesquely, lending vividness to the horror of the engraving. The old man saw it and stopped whispering even before my expression of horror made it necessary. Saw it and glanced quickly toward the floor of the room he had left an hour before. I followed his glance and beheld just above us on the loose plaster of the ancient ceiling a large irregular spot of wet crimson, which seemed to spread even as I viewed it. I did not shriek or move, but merely shut my eyes. A moment later came the titanic thunderbolt of thunderbolts, blasting that accursed house of unutterable secrets and bringing the oblivion which alone saved my mind. Sounds like the old man's been butchering somebody just above him. And he's dead now.